Hi, I'm Joel Studding, the Superintendent of the Sturgeon Bay Schools. Thank you for taking the time to view this video on our educational referendum program. The election is April 2nd, 2013. Today I'm going to try to cover revenue limits and our enrollment history. Those are two very important factors as to why we're here for the third time as a school district asking for a non-recurring referendum. I'm also going to talk about our mill rate history and then the state budget impacts that have caused us to be where we're at. We're going to go over our referendum history. We're going to talk about the budget reductions and the savings that the district has done over the past few years. We're also going to show you our budget forecast if we did not have a referendum. And then we're going to talk about the referendum resolution and what your tax impact would be. First, I think it's really important for me to go back and talk about revenue limits. Revenue limits were established in 1993 for the purpose of lowering property tax. At no time did the state ever sit down and talk about, okay, what is a quality education going to cost in Wisconsin at all schools and develop a formula based off of that. It was purely designed to be a temporary relief to property tax and lower it. They also introduced a QEO, which was the qualified economic offer that teachers had to take if a school board instituted it on them. That was a 3.8% total package offer. In 1996, Tommy Thompson, the governor of Wisconsin, determined that he wanted the revenue limits to be permanent, so he introduced two-thirds funding for the K-12 schools. And so now what we had is what we always called the three-legged stool. We had two-thirds funding from the state of Wisconsin, we had the revenue limits, and we had the QEO. And that was going to be able to provide property tax release along with providing a quality education in Wisconsin. Well, what happened in 2003, the state realized we can't afford two-thirds funding. First of all, I do need to make sure you realize Sturgeon Bay never received two-thirds funding. We have a funding formula that is based off of property values, and Sturgeon Bay has always been a district that has had large property values, so we have never received two-thirds funding. They were just funding two-thirds of the overall K-12 system. So some districts received more than two-thirds, and other districts like ours received less, and then other districts like Gibraltar, Washington Island don't receive any at all. So I don't want anybody to be under the impression that the state funded two-thirds of our school district. Well, in 2009, the other leg of the stool was taken away, and that was the QEO. And so now what's left is we have revenue limits, a formula that was designed to be temporary and designed to lower property tax. Revenue limits really restricts the amount of money that we can receive through general aid and local property tax. It really impacts Fund 10, Fund 39, and Fund 41. Fund 10 is our general fund. That's the fund that primarily funds most of our programming. Again, revenue limits were designed to control property tax. I can't say it enough. They were never designed based off of a formula that provides a quality education. Enrollment is such a key part of the revenue limit. It is one of the largest factors that determines your revenue limit. So as you have declining enrollment and you factor that in, that means your revenue limit is less. What happens in this situation, and what is a great injustice in the state, is we've allowed districts who are on the right side of the formula. They're a growing school district. They don't have quite the land value we have, so they receive a lot of state aid. They're able to offer a lot of different programs that districts like ours are not able to offer. I believe that revenue limits have allowed us to create the have and the have-not school districts. But when you look at enrollment for our school district, and here's a graphic representation of it, in around 2000 we had over 1,400 students. Now we have right around 1,200 students. Well, that loss of 200 students has had a dramatic impact on our revenue limit, really restricting what we have to use each year. The other issue that happened is they determined revenue limits by what you spent in 1992. So if you were a district like ours, who was very conservative and was a low-spending district, that's what your revenue limit got set at. If you were a high-spending district, then you had a much higher revenue limit set. So even from the get-go of revenue limits, we already had districts who were not being treated the same. Some had a much larger cushion to weather the storm of revenue limits. In this election alone coming up, there are over 52 elections to exceed the revenue limit. This is a state issue with a local solution. Mill rate history. When you take a look at 92-93 and our mill rate was $17.59, arguably you could say, hey, revenue limits were needed in order to get property tax under control. And again, for short term, it was a good idea. And even if you believe during the 80s and 90s districts were growing too fast and maybe adding programs they didn't need, were getting a little fat, you can see that in the 90s and early 2000, our district was trimming. Our revenue limit was, our mill rates were dropping, meaning we were having less revenue, and we were making the adjustments that we needed to make. The problem is this continued, and you look what happened in the middle of the 2000 and now in the last few years. Our revenue limits become so restrictive that we weren't able to no longer trim. We were now starting to cut the quality of the education that we had to offer. And I think some of the other factors that you really have to look at that go into play here when you look at our mill rate. In 2007 and 8, that is the year we finally passed our first revenue, non-recurring net revenue override. And of course that caused the mill rate to go up. But that was the time when our community determined that we need to continue to provide a quality education. There's certain things that we can't cut. There's certain class sizes we don't want to raise. We want a quality music program. We want a well-rounded education for our students. So we passed our first 3-year non-recurring referendum. And that of course was adding to the mill rate as having an override. But the other factor that caused our override to go up is the fact that we keep losing state aid. And you can see that in 2008, 2009, we lost almost $600,000 in state aid. And then in the last 5 years, we've lost $1.7 million in state aid. That's a direct tax onto our local property tax. That's shifting the burden from the state to our local property tax. And why does that happen? It's the formula. When you have a lot of land value, the state makes the assumption you can afford more of your district. So not only are we on the bad side of the revenue limit with declining enrollment, we're also on the side of the funding formula in which the state assumes our local property tax owners can afford more of our district. But one of the things the state has done is they've offered a tax credit. And you can see in 2012-13 that our tax credit was $1.5 million. Now the state of Wisconsin could have easily given that to us as state aid instead of a tax credit. And then our mill rate would have been $8.97, and we as a school would much rather see an $8.97 than a $10.93, because when you look at your tax bill, and I'm like everybody else, I'm a taxpayer here, I look at it and I see, wow, the school tax went up 7.1%. And if that's all you look at, then that's the only story you know. But if you actually look down and you look at the first dollar credit and you see that was a credit that went up 4.3%, and was, in this case, $72.14. And then you can see in the bottom left-hand corner highlighted is $319.08 for this tax bill. That's a direct tax. That's a direct tax credit based off of the school tax. When you take those and you subtract them off of our tax bill, then of course we didn't go up 7.1%. In fact, when you subtract them off, we're not even the largest portion of this tax bill. I think that's important for people to realize the whole story behind your tax bill and what's all tied to the school district. In 2007 and 8 is the first year we passed our referendum, and you can see for the first 3 years we had a $600,000, $1.1 million, $1.5 million. I think the real story here is the last 3 years. We passed a referendum for $1.2 million, $1.6 million, $1.9 million, but our school board has never taxed to that authority. We've always taxed less. And I think what that tells is our school board is constantly weighing out what is good for the school district, but is also what is good for the taxpayer. And so we continue to look for ways in which we can balance those two needs. And I have to applaud our board for being fiscally sound and making those decisions. Some reduction that's happened over the last few years, since 2002, 2003, when we took our biggest hit of almost $750,000 and 11.5 less staff members, all the way up to 2008 to 2012, when we've about $450,000 worth of reductions in school expense and 7 staff members. We continue to look for the ways in which we can be more efficient, or if class sizes have shrunk and we can reduce down, we do reduce down. We don't keep positions just to keep positions. And if you can look at the actual list that's taken place since the last referendum, and I'll particularly point out the high school social studies, science, and math. Our high school has taken the largest reduction in the last few years of students. And of course, if we have less students, we need less teachers. And so we made those cuts. Those were adjustments made based off of the population. But if you look at French, that's a choice to say we can't afford 2 foreign languages. So that's a loss of educational opportunity for our students. But those are the kind of the tough decisions we've had to make, even with revenue overrides. Now, since the last referendum, here's some savings that we would have never predicted. One is all of our employees are paying half of their retirement. That's a $420,000 a year savings. That's the WRS savings. Insurances. We changed insurance companies this year. We've also changed our benefit levels for our staff. We've also eliminated some insurances. That's going to be an annual savings of $529,000. Our alternative benefit has gone down by $89,000. We've decided to subcontract out transportation. That's going to be around a $200,000 a year savings. We share a speech and language teacher with Sebastopol. We've postponed some capital projects. As a school district, we continue to look for ways to be more efficient and make the reductions that we can to live within our means. But doing the same thing that we did this year, next year, here's what we do know. When we forecast it out and we look at it, we know that we're going to have a $1 million deficit next year. We know in 14-15 we'd be at a $1.3 million deficit, and in 15-16 a $1.6 million deficit. So even with all those savings that we've done over the last year, we still have that kind of deficit. And if you can see by the graph here, during 11 and 12, 12 and 13, when we have our revenue override, our expenses and our revenue equal the same. But of course, as you can see that the graph changes, that without a revenue override, eventually our expenses right away are more than our revenue, and eventually we have no fund balance. As a result of this, and after studying this for a long period of time, the Board of Education did pass the resolution that said, be it resolved by the School Board of the School District of Sturgeon Bay, Door County, Wisconsin, that the revenues included in the school district budget be authorized to exceed the revenue limits specified in Section 121.91 Wisconsin statute by $1 million for 2013 and 14 year only, by $1.3 million for 2014 and 15 school year only, and by $1.6 million for 2015-16 school year only for non-recurring purposes consisted of funding educational programming for students. So this money is asked for one time. It's a non-recurring referendum, not a recurring referendum. This is not a blank check to the school district, and it never has been. That's why we're running our third referendum. We also are looking at making sure that we continue to look at being efficient at what we do, and any areas that we can reduce down, we will still reduce down. This allows us to continue offering our quality education that we've had here. It's not asking to increase. It's not asking us to offer new programming or things like that. It's to continue the quality, well-rounded educational program that we have here at Sturgeon Bay. What is the tax impact to the local property tax owner? This year in 2013, our mill rate was $10.93. In 13-14, if we pass a $1 million non-recurring, our mill rate will actually drop by 60 cents or $60 on a $100,000 home. In 14-15, it would then go to $10.43, which would be 10 cents more than 13-14, or it would be $10 more on a $100,000 home. In 15-16, it would go to $10.97. That would be a 54-cent increase, or $54 on a $100,000 home. If you look at from 2012-13 through 2015-16, it's actually a $4 increase on a $100,000 home. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please give me a call at 746-2801 or email me at jstudding@sturbay.k12.wi.us. If you have some specific financial questions, you can always get a hold of our business manager, Tom Olson, at 746-2805 or tolson@sturbay.k12.wi.us. Again, I want to just remind everybody that the election is April 2nd, 2013, so please go out and vote. Thank you.